Welcome back to the program. This is Business Morning, live on Channels Television. Time now to talk to our partners from Financial Derivatives Company. We've got Adim Okwesa on the show this morning. Thanks a great deal for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
So, it's traditional. Thursdays, we'll talk about commodities. And let's look at the burning economic issues this time. Yesterday, US FOMC, Federal Open Market Operation, concluded its meeting, left rates unchanged. A lot of people had actually predicted that this year alone, FOMC will hike rates like 2 to max of 3 times and all that. But it looks like there were some economic issues surrounding the reason why the FOMC or the Fed had to leave the rates unchanged. Give us more insight into that.
Yes, definitely. I think the two watchwords from having read the statements were patience and caution. I think it's clear that the Federal Reserve has diverged from its previous tightening bias and is going to reduce the pace of, it's going to slow the pace of monetary tightening in 2019. Well, markets have expected that the Federal Reserve would reduce the pace of monetary tightening, but now I think the statements confirm that this is happening at a much faster pace than expected. Like you said, given the risks to the American and global economy, which are tilted to the downside. So this is very positive news for the global and Nigerian economy. I think in terms of Nigeria, obviously this will reduce some pressures facing emerging markets, which have been quite under a bit of pressure from tightening global liquidity conditions, and we're already seeing some emerging market currencies strengthening, like the South African rand. In terms of Nigeria, I think this is positive news for Nigeria. We have a stable naira. Yields on government securities are relatively high. So all this will do is continue to make the country attractive for investors. So this is definitely a positive one for Nigeria. And of course, we're about to tap the Eurobond.
But you know, again, we still have quantitative easing in a couple of European countries, and that's, for some analysts, is not much of a relief, actually.
Yes, well, we still have some quantitative easing. However, I think some hints, especially from the European Central Bank and the Japanese Central Bank, is that they are going to perhaps halt that quantitative easing in 2019 and perhaps gradually hike rates. But I don't think that is going to be much of a concern for international investors. I think the benchmark will be what the US Fed is doing. And it's clear that the US Fed is going to adopt a more cautious approach towards raising rates. Like you said, markets now expect only 2 rate hikes in 2019, down from 3 or 4 previously. So it has definitely granted some respite for the global and domestic economy.
Okay, so with the way things are right now, status quo remains. A few demands should still be coming in from some offshore investors into the Nigerian markets. That will certainly be the direct implication of FOMC leaving rates unchanged at this time for Nigeria. Okay, so let's move on to a couple of other things. Brent oil remains up some 0.92% to $62.22, so $62.22 per barrel. Nothing really much there, but is there anything likely to change this particular figure in the moment from now?
Not really. The only thing, in my opinion, that might induce a drastic change in oil prices is the direction, the outcome of this US-China trade talks that is happening now. If there's a collapse in talks, then I think markets would expect that there will be no imminent resolution of this crisis. I mean, markets are quite divided about how the outcome would, how the talks would go, because the two presidents are very unpredictable. Donald Trump might just wake up one morning and tweet something which will throw a spanner in the works. And apart from the US's concerns of trying to reduce its trade deficits with China, there are more material concerns, for example, like fraudulent technology transfer and international intellectual property theft, which the Chinese, I doubt they will make substantive changes in that area. So it's still very uncertain how those trade talks would go. So, and that will be a key determinant factor of how oil prices will trade in the near to medium term.
All right, thanks for that information. Well, part of the bonding economic issues, Naira was flat at 363 Naira to the dollar. Is that the buy side or the sell side?
Sell side.
Oh, okay.
363.
So there's an appreciation to 363 Naira 32 kobo. That was at the IFX window. External reserves remains flat as well, $43.17 billion. And of course, retail diesel price flat at 235 Naira per liter. You think these are some kind of election strategies?
Yes, the Naira has been flat. Obviously, the Naira is a very politically sensitive subject. So I believe the central bank will do everything in its power to keep that rate stable as long as possible. So I think that is definitely good news. The Naira has been hovering, although there's been a bit of volatility, has been hovering within a very tight range.
It goes up and then comes down.
361 to 365. That is still a very tight range. So that is definitely good news for the country.
Okay. So some kudos to the central bank there and the Emefiele-led team. So we saw mixed movements in domestic commodity prices, and the impacts of this we feel in the goodies and, of course, the downers. Bring us up to speed on this.
Yes, FDC, we conducted a market survey of food prices, and what we found out was that there was a mixed movement in domestic food prices. Commodities like gari and rice, gari and tomatoes went up. However, commodities like pepper, they all declined. So, but going back as far back as the harvest season, which began in September, October, the overwhelming trend has been one of declining food prices.
Right.
This is definitely good news because having looked at the trends in the food and non-alcoholic price index, we can see that it is domestic food prices that have been increasing. Imported inflation has been subdued, but domestic food prices have been...
But, you know, some people also argue that there will be more food imported inflation this year, given the price hike in the countries where Nigeria imports a lot of the raw materials from sugar, from Brazil, India, and all of these other countries. Again, because there's been this climate change and the weather has been uncertain. So do you think we will still have imported inflation, or it's just going to remain this way for some time?
I believe there will be imported inflation, but to be at a very subtle, very stable rate, which extends back to 2018, because the Naira, I believe, I'm very confident that the Naira will be very stable for much of 2019. So, but on the domestic side, domestic food prices have increased owing to supply disruptions because we have these violent clashes in the Middle Belt and flooding in the north. So, and all signs look like there'll be flooding this year again because rains have started.
Yeah, and it's happening early in the year. Doesn't that signal some kind of droughts towards the end of the year or something?
Maybe. So it just means that there'll be a lot of, like, the food supply might be disrupted this year. So that is one thing to monitor.
So how do we hedge such risks?
That is a challenge now. I think there are major infrastructural constraints that hinder our ability to supply food at a very decent pace. And until that crisis in the Middle Belt is supplied, it's a very complicated, intractable issue. So until that crisis is averted, is nullified, then I think food prices might still continue increasing, which is unfortunate for the consumers.
So the outlook basically looks bleak.
Outlook looks bleak
going forward.
In the medium term, but in the near term, I think inflation should, at least that food price index should, going from our survey, food prices should reduce, which should moderate broader inflationary pressures.
All right, Adim Okweso, thank you so much for your thoughts being shared on this commodities market updates today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So let's go to the stock exchange, where our other studio there, our annex, where we have a guest waiting for us, Mr. Femi Akintunde, who is the Chief Executive of Alphamid Facilities, or Alphamid Group specifically. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, sir.
Thank you very much, Temple.
Right. I should say first, congratulations on your recognition by the London Stock Exchange. What does that tell us about facilities management in Nigeria? You are one of the few over 300 companies recognized across Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Temple. Actually, there were 360 companies for Africa, and about 1,000 in Europe. For Africa, out of the 360, I must say that 97 actually came from Nigeria, which has a lot of implications for us. First, for our family, it's both a challenge and a motivation. A motivation in the sense that we're happy that what we're doing is being recognized as a global best practice and is really impacting the community where we're operating from. It's a challenge in the sense that once we begin to be highlighted as a key player at that level, it calls for more dedication and more commitment to global best practice standards. For Nigeria, it also means that despite all the challenges that we have, we could identify 97 good companies that are emerging because the benchmark was for companies that are operating below $1 billion revenue. And it means, we're not really talking of the big players like the Dangotes of this world who are already there anyway. So these are emerging companies that London Stock Exchange has identified. And for Nigeria, it also means that we actually have, we can see some silver lining in the cloud, that things are not that bad, and we can showcase the best of our own to the international market. For international investors, what this also means, because we've started receiving a lot of inquiries, both from within Africa and outside Africa, where people naturally and generally believe that Africa is a black box. You don't understand anything about how things work there. Part of the requirements for this election is actually the transparency of your corporate governance structure and also the accounting standards that you comply with. We are IFRS compliant, and one of the global four, EY, audits our account. So that was quite revealing to them that companies at our level could actually be operating at that kind of standard and hold ourselves responsible. So international investors are beginning to see that there is actually opportunity to invest in good companies in Nigeria. And for the capital market, we feel we should also be able to celebrate our own and take a cue from this development to actually identify those emerging businesses that could be said to be global SMEs, because that's what I would call them, and support us, because it's really, really tough doing business in this kind of environment. And I mean, to achieve the same level of results, you need to put in almost 10 times the same effort compared to other climes where things are a bit more standard and supportive. So we're looking forward to seeing more of Nigerian investors pay more attention, the capital market, pay more attention to this group of companies and support them to also boost the capital market opportunities in Nigeria.
Okay, so hopefully this will at least bring in more of foreign direct investment and, of course, some kind of FPIs to some companies here. Again, for those that are looking for some private capital financing, then this provides an opportunity for some of those recognized companies. Thank you for your thoughts being shared there, sir. So let's look at the fact that infrastructure remains critical to Nigeria. Of course, we know that the federal government, President Muhammadu Buhari specifically, has now signed the Executive Order 007 into law, and that is expected to help complete some of the major roads across the Federation. And we also know that there was an Executive Order 005, and that was to help a lot of the local players, engineers like you, to now participate more in roads construction works in Nigeria. Let us square this off. Executive Order 005 and Executive Order 007. What does this bring to the mind of Korean, that's members of Korean, engineers like you in your field?
Let's start first of all from the base. It's projected that the global economy will experience about $20 trillion investment into infrastructure development this year. That accounts for about 25% of global GDP. From what we've seen of 2019 budget, Nigeria is planning to spend about 6.8 billion, which is equivalent to 1.66%. You will agree with me that that is extremely very, very low. And infrastructure is a key driver of economic growth. It helps competitiveness, it helps productivity of people, it helps companies to perform more efficiently. And if we're not putting more into that space, we should not expect to see dramatic change in the living standard of an average Nigerian. So starting from there, let's now drill down to the executive of the 12. Yes, it's a good decision, and one thing that it will definitely do is that it helps to accelerate the investment in infrastructure, particularly in the area of road construction, because what that does is that it doesn't take the liability that the companies should will incur away in terms of what needs to be done, but it's a form of a tax credit which you can use to invest in roads. So that takes away from the bureaucracy of government approval, budget, fund allocation, and all what have you. So government companies can directly take cash credit, tax credit, and invest it in road infrastructure. So that will definitely improve things, and a number of companies have been identified for the pilot phase, the Lafarge of this world, the Dangote, the Unilever, and co. But my own concern more is that road construction and road infrastructure development is good. But if you take it that we are a nation of about 180, 190 million people, we need to begin to pay more attention to mass transport system. The road infrastructure that we have currently can only take so much and can only take so many people at a time. When you invest in road transport, I mean in mass transport like the railways, the rail tracks and stuff like that, you move more people, you move more goods from one point to the other. So I would say that it's a good opportunity to accelerate the development of infrastructure in the area of road, but please let us also focus more on on mass transport system.
So, Mr. Akintunde, the next question will be that what is the capacity of local players in this regard? Because over the years, we have had records of collapsed bridges, collapsed buildings, and more.
Thank you. I think we need to really be brutally honest with ourselves at this point. And I'm an engineer, I believe you know that as well. And I'm passionate about developing local capacity for development. But we need to ask ourselves, how much effort and investment have we put into the development of this local capacity over time? What you don't have, you cannot give. I think that we have not been deliberate enough. We have not been focused enough to grow capacity in this area. When you talk about infrastructure development, there are two dimensions of it. You have the provision, and then you have the management of it, the maintenance, operation and maintenance. The provision is definitely capital intensive. We'll continue to rely on some foreign investment in that direction. And government is looking at different sources of funding of capital to fund this part. So, but if anybody brings capital into your country to invest in your infrastructure, definitely they would demand certain degree of management control to ensure that their investment will be repaid back. And if Nigerian engineers have to play a critical role in this area, I think we should start from being a key player in the area of the provisioning, the designing, the construction, and see the educational system that we have. We should focus more on the development of STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We see that the curriculum of most of our higher institutions are not really being devoted to the development of capacity in this area. We have to start from that grassroots, because whatever we miss now is going to impact us big time in the future. And I think, secondly, government should also make conscious effort to integrate Nigerian engineers with these processes. It's good enough for somebody to bring money to this country, but hey, it's still our country. We must create a position for our people to play in it and allow the local players to also contribute their quota to the development, because that's the capacity that we can retain on the long term.
Okay, Mr. Akintunde, thank you so very much for your thoughts. Unfortunately, we don't really have much time to thrash out these issues very well, because there are other issues around these financing issues, and of course, a whole lot of things to actually discuss. We should engage you more on the program on this particular discussion. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Now, after the break, we will come back to talk about the 150 billion naira that the Debt Management Office offered yesterday, and of course, an insight into the current trading day at the equities market.